The sequel to one of the most beloved vampire RPGs of all time was meant to be a triumph, a return to the dark, seductive underworld of the Kindred. This should have been such an easy win for both publishers and developers, but in the case of Bloodlines 2, what arrived feels like a shadow of the promise. It feels like a game that tried to mark checkboxes without actually understanding why the checkboxes were there in the first place. And the game is a bit of a Trojan horse as well, because although there are bad parts initially, they are hidden by what is a well-made premise. But once you are deep into it, it's when you actually see a steep decline in quality. And by then, it's already too late to back out. You're in for the ride. Today we are going to break down from top to bottom how the game came to be, where it stumbled, how the gameplay fails to deliver, how the story completely unravels, and how the choices you take mean little to this game. I feel like I should do a disclaimer or some sort of content warning, because this might get spicy. I haven't played the game that made me so angry, so fast as Bloodlines 2, especially as I hit the midpoint mark of the game. That's when things really fell apart. So be warned, I might get angry, I might not be as coherent as other videos I've made in the past, so let's see how it goes. Before we dig into gameplay and story, I think we need to look at how this game came to be, because the behind the scenes story of the game explains a lot of what you feel when you play it. The game was first announced in early 2019, with Artsuit Labs at the helm and with the original Bloodlines writer Brian Mitsoda on board. The pitch looked strong, a true successor to the original game, set in Seattle with the promise of deep RPG systems, vampire politics, meaningful choices. Everything that you want to have on this kind of game. It would be the perfect sequel that players have been wanting for 20 years now. But almost immediately, the cracks started appearing in its development. In 2020, lead narrative designer Brian Mitsoda and creative director Kahai Klane were abruptly fired with little explanation. Senior narrative designer Kara Ellinson departed later that year. Meanwhile, major writer Chris Avalon had been contracted early on, but his contributions seem to have been scrapped amid controversy. The departures aren't minor, they indicate major shifts in creative decision, narrative vision, and team stability. And they are also not people that you can just replace with equally as talented writers unless you have a sheer amount of luck. We are talking about industry veterans, and once you start firing off your veterans, it's not like other veterans will be eager to join your development team, right? They don't want to be the next ones on the shopping block. In February 2021, the publisher Paradox announced that Artsuit Labs would no longer be leading the project and that the release would be delayed indefinitely. Reports suggested that the game might just be cancelled. Later, the UK studio, The Chinese Room, took over the development. They inherited the project, used some of the previous assets, but reworked large portions of the codebase, vision, and mechanics. With the new team came a new vision. The game shifted away from a large-scale open RPG systems towards a more tightly structured narrative experience, which is something that the Chinese Room is very familiar with, having developed Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs, Dear Esther, Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, and you might see a pattern here. It's essentially everything that people refer to as walking simulators. And I think you can see why this didn't bode well for Bloodlines 2. Many core RPG features reportedly vanished. Full character customization, multiple clans, deep stat systems, weapon mechanics, things that were not only on the first game, but essential things to portray a VTM Bloodlines game in its purpose, role-playing. Fans of the original began to worry, and rightly so. Changes this radical often signal deeper issues in development, and those worries were proven right. When you're playing Bloodlines 2, you're playing a product of multiple reboots, creative pivots, and compromises. It's not the game that was promised in 2019, and the development instability underlies many of the functional and structural issues you'll recognize in gameplay and narrative. When systems are changed late in game development, pieces get cut out, ambitions shrink, the soul of the project often suffers. I think it would have been okay if they scraped the project and started anew, gave it a different name, new marketing material, but it was already too late because they advertised the game like the second coming of Christ, took pre-orders and yelled at everyone that would listen that this game would be a worthy successor. And that leads us to with the development's background in mind, let's examine how the game actually plays. Because the gameplay is where the impact of those behind-the-scenes troubles becomes very visible, right off the bat. There were more consequences other than the gameplay, but we'll get to those later on. On paper, you're a powerful elder vampire. Supernatural disciplines, stealth, manipulation. In reality, you're like a wild cat on hallucinogenics, scratching at everything in front of you. The combat lacks weight, hits feel weak, enemy reactions minimal, feedback shallow. To provide context to this, I think it's important to mention that you're playing an elder vampire, that your powers are beyond most vampires, and yet you're fighting thin-blooded vampires and taking 3 to 4 hits to kill them. At the very least, they would probably explode when you hit them, being such an old vampire. This really tells me that there was a huge disconnect between what the writers wanted when they wrote the Nomad, our protagonist, and what the people actually designing the game understood him to be. But hey, melee combat is not easy. I can count with my fingers the amount of games that actually have a good one. So, why the fuck did they not have the capability of wielding weapons? They let you use telekinesis to wield a weapon to throw to your enemies, but you can only pick it up from the ground. Somehow, it's impossible for you to just pick it up and wield it and start shooting. Again, big disconnect between game designers and writers on what the Nomad is actually capable of. It's not like he looked at the gun and said, oh, I can only use this if I'm not touching it. It makes no sense. Let's talk disciplines, your vampire powers, the thing that everyone wants to have because it would make you the coolest bastard ever. They are very dull, very few meaningful combinations, very little room for creativity, many powers feel like reskins of each other. Instead of feeling like a predator, you feel like a generic guy with some supernatural powers. But if you thought that was bad enough, that the powers were boring, they also doubled down by gatekeeping them from you. And how did they do that? By having you sucking blood from random people on the streets in order to unlock the powers. You are literally just farming these blood cows walking around for a random essence on their blood, so that you can then talk with other vampires to learn the powers. It's safe to say that I didn't even feel like I wanted to get all the powers, because who knew that people don't want to do chores before they actually get to feel powerful? The stealth mechanics in the game are also poorly executed at best, and with very little reward for doing them. It just feels like they are wasting your time. There were multiple times that I would drop onto an enemy while crouched and somehow they would still know I'm there. When I'm a motherfucking elder vampire, not the guy that trains to be a ninja on the local dojo on Sundays. Just, can you let me be a cool vampire, please? The side quests follow one of 3 templates. 1. Go there, kill something. 2. Talk to someone, pick a dialogue option. 3. Fetch an item, return. They are basically errands with minimal narrative weight. They are good to learn about each of the clans and some of the characters, but they offer very little in terms of rewards. The main quests don't vary much either. Although they are usually peppered with some more investigative elements, they're pretty much the same, but with some more well-designed set pieces, let's call it that. And because the game reduced or lost entirely some of the elements and systems that compose role-playing games, weapon choice, skill trees, environment manipulation, it ends up with a very thin loop of gameplay. It's combat, on-rails exploration, cutscene, mission complete. There's no dynamics, no systems that feed into each other, there's no multiple ways you can achieve the same results or even different results, it's all the same. Character progression exists in name only. The only thing that could be considered progressions are the disciplines, and since they are usually just the same variation of damage, mobility, stealth, there's little sense of evolution or experimentation to be had. I spent most of my game with the same powers because there was no real need to change them. Once you get used to the ones you like, or the ones that suck the least, there's little reason to get the others because they will either be very circumstantial or not play well with the other powers. Missions don't challenge those systems either, so you never feel your growth, your challenge beyond facing more enemies or spongier enemies. I feel like these were probably the first systems they cut in favor of a more action-oriented game. Less options for the player, less options to account for the developers. Yay. Okay, so I don't know what Seattle is like these days, but my idea, based on the music scene that grew there in the 90s, it should be a city with a lot of culture, a lot of different people hanging around. It should represent variety and also defiance of the norm. It's pretty much the grunge capital of the world, for God's sake. But Seattle in Bloodlines 2 is anything but. It's basically a small hub which feels lifeless, claustrophobic, and boring. I understand that they couldn't do a city like Cyberpunk 2077 with amazing vistas everywhere, and that the snow-filled streets are a great cover to the lack of means in development, but they went the complete opposite and made none of the locations actually shine. If in 5 years time I'll remember even the name of one of the locations, I'd be amazed at myself. The NPCs all repeat the same lines of dialogue over and over, to the point that after you check things out for the first 2 hours of the game, you've already seen pretty much everything, and what little new things you see later on, they're not going to be any better. And to make the situation even worse, they decided that Nomad would be able to glide and jump from the rooftops, which by itself wouldn't be a problem, except the rooftops are filled with enemies at one point of the game, making you choose between: do you want to fly and attract the attention of 500 other people that are walking around the rooftops for no reason, or do you want to slowly walk through the boring streets? It's like every decision for the traversal of the world was made to be boring, slow, and a nuisance. If the streets were interesting to walk, you'd have no problem doing it. If the rooftops had good visible landmarks to direct you and didn't overwhelm you with enemies, then that could be fun. It's one of those things that screams developers that didn't play their own game. There's plenty of other things that I think are wrong with the gameplay, but I'm going to finish up with 2 that for me are clear indicators of bad development and worse creativity. The first one being the city being used as a backdrop of the game rather than a part of the game itself. This might not make a lot of sense for the people that haven't played the pen and paper RPG that Bloodlines 2 is based off, but each city in the world has a personality of itself, its own challenges, its own politics for humankind, its own charm. In this game you could replace every single mention of Seattle with, let's say, Ontario, Canada, and I think no one would know the difference. And it's even more pronounced when the devs came up with collect 30 thingamajigs around the city. Are you done? Collect 30 more thingamajigs around the city. And the thingamajigs don't even make sense to collect. It's the laziest use of a city I've ever seen. The second part that is very lackluster is how little feedback there is for the decisions you make along the story. It's like playing a Telltale game, but instead of seeing the difference your actions make in a couple of hours, you get those differences exclusively told to you at the end of the game. And even then, they don't matter at all, because there are like 2 or 3 decisions at the very end of the game that overwrite anything else you've done before. This game is marketed as a role-playing game. I just didn't realize that the role I was playing is a doofus for the developers to laugh at. But anyway, let's move on to the story analysis. I will not go into a bit-by-bit thing and explain the full story. I think if you just want that, just read the Wikipedia or watch someone play, because there is not much of a story to be had that deserves to be told, I think. At least for the later part of the game. So this part will contain spoilers. If you care about it, jump to the next chapter where we'll analyze some more of the game. Otherwise, just keep watching and let's talk about the story. A large part of the game's appeal was going to be a rich vampire story, full of politics, personal horror, betrayal. The original did this with style, so how badly does Bloodlines 2 get? You awaken as an ancient vampire that calls himself Fire, or Nomad, that has a brand on his hand, and this brand suppresses your powers. Inside your mind, you hear the ghost voice of a 1920s detective, Fabian, that doesn't quite know how he got there, but is just a presence in your head. You eventually enter vampire-ruled Seattle, factions are at war, the Masquerade is breaking, risking all vampires to be discovered. This is a strong premise. It hints at mystery of finding out what is happening to you and who Fabian is, provides a dual narrative for you to follow, both from the Fire's perspective and Fabian's perspective. It kinda hints at choice, you know? It presents you with all of these things, kind of nudging you into thinking that you might have a choice on what gets to be told on this story. But in the end, it really amounts to nothing. For most of the game, you joined Vampire Society as this mythic vampire of old that seemingly everyone in Seattle knows about. You meet clan members, investigate things around the city, you can even investigate the past through Fabian's memories, which is a really nice break from the action of being the Nomad. For the first 5 to 8 hours of the game, maybe even a little bit more, depending how much you get into the side quests, the game actually feels decent to play. Even though the combat is very poor, the story really carries everything else on its shoulders. But then, things start to fall apart. These flashbacks that you get point you to a character called the Gardener, and they are a big focus on the first part of the game, but just as quickly as they rise in relevancy, they immediately plummet to the Gardener being just almost of no consequence to the grand scheme of things. Not to mention how convenient it is that characters just forget to mention his existence, or at least where his location is. And it's my conviction, and I cannot prove this, that this character was meant to be a lot more than what we got. I think this was the point at which the writers were fired and someone else had to come up with a convoluted way of continuing the story in a different direction that fit the new parameters of the game development. And what a direction it was! From the early part of the game, you are introduced to Safia, a kindred like you, that is focused on researching things for the prince of the city. Now, there is something that you need to understand about Safia, and in order to explain it to you, I'll use a live action example. Now, let's say you meet a girl through some friends, you hit it off. She's kinda awkward, but you kinda get into it and maybe you become friends. And the next day or so, you go on a date. And you arrive at the date and she has a dossier of various information on the table of your dinner date, let's say. And that dossier has basically everything about you. It tells about the trip that you did to Dubai 3 years ago. Who did you go with? The names of your ex-girlfriends. Maybe the names of your family. Maybe the names of your friends. So you're going into a date with this girl that you met just 1 day ago and she seemingly knows everything about you. Now, why am I telling you this? Because it's pretty much what happens with Safia. In a very amateur writing, they play their cards so badly that you can predict she's working against you very early on, because of 3 things. She was reading a book about the nomads, even before anyone knew you were in the city. She oozes love for you, in a masked attempt to show devotion. It's like she's enamored by you, she looks at you like you are a god. It's basically that. You're a god. If you join a cult and people shower you with love, so that you remain in the cult, that's pretty much what she's doing. Pretty much of the game. She is the most comically awkward person to talk to. And that would be okay if it was endearing, and for some part it is, but it just comes out as fake. She's a vampire, constantly apologizing for everything she does and messing up social interactions like she's been alive for, I don't know, 1 year or so. Like, come on, there was obviously something wrong there. I don't think it's just me being a super detective and immediately noticing something wrong. I think most RPG players would notice this because we are used to investigate, make connections, pay attention to dialogue, which is the polar opposite of what these devs seem to think we are able to do, and because of that, you get this story. At some point you are also introduced to vampire hunters, which are comically incompetent. While you fight lowly vampires and you can struggle with them in combat, hunters are basically just slapped around, and the only reason they exist, well, you can turn their commander into a vampire or not. And guess what? If you don't turn them and instead you kill them, you automatically get a bad ending, no matter any other choices you've made before or after. It amazes me that developers like this come up with the stupidest ways to put players in a position that they can throw away an entire playthrough for a simple decision. And here's the real kicker: the game has no manual saving, so if you regret your choice, good luck getting back to the point where you can change it. So by the end of the game, you've met like 15 different characters, but only 2 are really relevant to anything that happens at the end. All those decisions that you made in dialogue that either pissed someone off or made them like you, it's all meaningless as long as you make like 3 choices at the end. Do you want to stay in the city? Where do you want the hunters to go? Who do you think should be prince? That's it. There's probably like 1 more decision or 2. There's no chances for you to change outcomes throughout the game. I could stay here and go into more detail about the unresolved motivations of each of the characters, but honestly, if they can't even make your decisions have any worth, I think there's no point into looking to what decisions they made for the NPCs in your behalf. To cut a very convoluted story short, in the final act you uncover Sophia's plot. You find the origin of the brand in your arm that is binding you. You confront Sophia about this and kill her in a typical boss fight. The story in Bloodlines 2 begins with ambition, but ends with compromise. It feels like the writers wanted to take the story in one direction, and then the developers had to hard pivot it to something that was the minimum viable product rather than the original goal. It gives you cool moments, like the fight with Isabella at the club. It was amazing, but it fails to give you a journey that you can feel part of. It gives you a couple of story reveals that are worth it, but very abysmal quality everywhere else. And when your story as an ancient vampire is about being powerful, being free, never staying in one place, choosing your path, it's actually painful that you discover you have none of that as a player. Everything is pretty much decided for you. No agency required on your part. When you step into an RPG, you expect your decisions to ripple outward, to change relationships, politics, the world. You need to feel tension because you chose one path and alienated another. Bloodlines 2 doesn't allow you to have this. The choice of your clan limits you to starting powers and some different voice lines. The choices you make on your allegiances don't really matter because most of the characters will still be right there pretty much until the end of the game. You don't feel the need to choose different powers for different circumstances because they all work in similar ways. You don't need to change your approach to the task at hand because there is nothing for you to choose from. There's no risk-reward dynamic for your decisions because everything is already neatly set up for you to follow. And this is really the biggest crime you can commit when developing an RPG. If you give your players so little agency, you're not having them play a role. Bloodlines 2 is essentially glorified action game with very light RPG mechanics at its best. At its worst, it's a bad action game because the devs didn't have the authority to make cool set pieces for you to experience, and it's a bad RPG because the devs didn't know choices are a required part of this type of experience. If you don't feel your choices matter, you stop caring. If you realize you're following a corridor in a vampire cloak rather than forging your own path, the illusion breaks. And when a game's theme is predation, power, consequence, this break is magnified. To wrap this up, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 is not a complete disaster, even if I was extremely critical of it. It provides some solid 10 hours of fun with an intriguing game if you're looking for a game related to vampires, and you can forgive the rest of the hours that you'll not have fun with. It has style, it has moments of promise, it has a world many of us want to love. Many fans have waited 20 years for this, many players want more vampire-centric games, but I think this was a match made in hell for everyone. For the publisher that didn't understand the IP, for the devs that had to pick up the pieces and do something they had no experience doing, for the players that wanted one thing and got another, and for the players that had no expectation at all and were still left disappointed. I think this game is the definition of leaderless development. Too many cooks in the kitchen and no chef to call the shots of how the kitchen should run. I have a lot of experience in VTM, I've played the pen and paper games, I've read a lot of the books, I've played some of the games. Funny enough, I didn't play the original, maybe I should do that at some point. I only tried it out once, I guess, years ago, and I didn't really get into it at the time. I'm a big fan of VTM for the worlds, the lore, the players. The people that play the pen and paper books, they are very different from the people that play the Dungeons and Dragons style adventures. It's very different kinds of games. So yeah, as a big fan of VTM, of vampires, of the lore of vampires, of stories related to vampires, I really feel that there was a missed opportunity here to match the right studio with the right attitude, with the right budget, with the right idea. But anyway, what did you think of the game? Was it disappointing to you, or you actually had fun? Let me know in the comments, like and subscribe, it all helps. And if you'd like to see more about vampires and VTM, check out my video about Kindred, a TV show based on Vampire the Masquerade. It's an old show, but it's really good. I really recommend that you check my video and check out the series as well. Thank you so much for watching. Love you all, and bye bye.